Welcome to the Alpha Human Podcast. I'm your host, Lawrence Rosenberg, and today's guest is Mark Sewell. Mark is a Marine veteran who also spent 20 years as an FBI agent investigating violent criminal organizations, including La Cosa Nostra, criminal street gangs, outlaw motorcycle gangs, as well as helping hunt and capture terrorists in the mountains of Afghanistan. He also served as the Stolen Valor Coordinator for the FBI's Atlanta office, successfully investigating and prosecuting multiple cases of military fraud. Now, Mark began his career with the FBI in 1997 with what would become a landmark case, the investigation into the infamous Gold Club, an Atlanta strip club with deep ties to the Mafia. The trial that followed in 2001 dominated national headlines and ultimately led to what has been described as the FBI's most successful financial win against the Mafia in U.S. law enforcement history. Now, Mark is also the author of the book that blows the lid off this case, entitled Investigating America's Most Notorious Strip Club, the FBI, the Gold Club, and the Mafia, which provides an inside look at the investigation as well as the trial. Since 2019, Mark has worked as an FBI instructor, specializing in human intelligence, and he currently trains law enforcement agencies worldwide. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for the invite. And after listening to that introduction, I think we should stop right there. I don't think I could do any better than that. Yeah.
Well, listen, I'll tell you what, you have an incredible resume. You've done so many different things, and I definitely want a lot of elements of your career and the mindset that drives you. But I got to tell you, I read the book, and it's a fascinating read, Mark. It's first of all, it's a wild case that goes into some of the most well-known mafia figures of the modern era, along with you got professional baseball players, football, basketball players, you got professional wrestlers, you got movie stars, you got rock stars, police officers got involved in this
Yeah.
case on the wrong side of it. You got everything here. I think you accurately described it in the book as being like the bar scene in Star Wars.
Yes. I can't take credit for that line. If you remember in the book, I give the credit to who was then my training agent, John Simmons.
Right.
And he actually started the case, and I came in and helped him as it was getting started. But that was his line, bar scene in Star Wars, because we had such a cast of characters, and it's very appropriate. Yes.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling who shows up in this book because, I mean, I think I remember some of this case being bandied about on the news channels at the time. It's a while ago now, but in reading the book and going into it, I mean, you just can't make this up. Who shows up at the trial? Who shows up being a witness that you gotta interview? Who's getting investigated? I mean, it is, yeah, it's definitely the Star Wars bar scene. So we'll get into it. But before we do, for the audience, what I'd like to maybe start out with is how you found your way to a career with the FBI, because you started your career of service with the Marines, not with law enforcement. You started with the Marines, and we often, at least I don't often hear lots of stories of U.S. Marines becoming FBI agents. Usually, you hear about people getting criminology degrees, you hear about people getting law degrees, and then they with the goal of becoming an FBI agent. But I
Right.
could imagine very easily why some of the best aides come out of our elite fighting and military combat units. So would love to hear your story on how you got there.
We talked about mafia just a few minutes ago. There is a Marine mafia in the FBI, without a doubt.
Okay.
It's amazing how many of my fellow Marines have joined the Bureau uh, historically and then in the present as well, because I still teach young agents and I bump into Marines in every class. But you mentioned the traditional route, which is take some college courses, get a degree, and that type of thing. And I started that my freshman year out of high school at a local junior college, taking I guess it would have been criminal justice. I don't know what they called it in 1985, but probably criminal justice type classes. I remember my instructors were police officers, and it was their side job to teach these courses and so forth. My dad died that first semester, and so priorities change financially and socially, and I had more responsibilities. And one thing led to another, and a couple years later, I joined the Marines because I had to drop out of college and work, and figured if I'm going to work, how about work and have fun at the same time? So I joined the Marines in 1987. I came in married. My wife and I had just gotten married, so I joined the Marines, and I was already married, which was
Wow.
different. It was different, and it was a challenge. Melody was or is a college graduate. By the time I joined the Marines, she had already become a registered nurse.
Okay.
So now we're moving around the country, but that's just to give you a little bit of flavor. But when we decided I was going to join the Marines, we didn't want to miss Christmas. We didn't want to be separated for Christmas. So I'm talking to the recruiter, and he said, the only way, because now we're in the fall, he
Okay.
said, the only way I can get you to boot camp and get you back before Christmas is you have to go in open contract. Well, I didn't know what open contract meant, so he described it to me as that
Yeah.
the Marine Corps will tell you about halfway through boot camp what your job's going to be. And I was dumb enough to do it. And my first job was at Camp Lejeune was to drive a bread truck around and deliver mail, if you can believe that. So
There you go.
my Marine buddies to this very day call me the mailman. Yeah. Yeah. So, but I shortly thereafter, I was able to qualify for a program where the Marine Corps takes non-commissioned officers and sends them back to college to get a degree, and then turn them into officers. Marine Corps likes to have about 10 to 20% of their officer corps come from the enlisted ranks.
Okay.
And so the Marine Corps really pushes this program. I got accepted for it. I went to college at the Citadel Military Academy of South Carolina,
Okay.
Military College of South Carolina. And then I commissioned and became a intelligence officer. And from the intelligence community, of course, I had the highest background clearance that you can have, top secret with SCI, and that helped me transition right into the FBI. The FBI recruiter came on to my Marine base in Hawaii and took 7 lieutenants out of my battalion in a 12-month period.
Wow.
Because we all had those clearances and we could pass the FBI background, so we were an easy target, and we were all willing to do it. So I had 45 days separation between the Marine Corps and when I started FBI Academy in Quantico. So I was right back at Quantico where I'd spent previous time in the Marine Corps.
So how long did you spend in the Marine Corps?
9 years, 7 months, and 8 days.
You got it down to the day. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was your favorite part of being in the Marines?
When you ask part, do you mean job assignment, duty?
Yeah. Job assignment. Yeah.
I ended on a bang. I'm going to give you a 1A and a 1B.
Okay.
The 1A would be I was a reconnaissance platoon commander for 18 months.
Okay.
And got to run around in small boats and jump out of airplanes and do those kind of things. And then from that, I was selected to be an aide for a 2-star general, and that would be my 1B. And that opens your world to the big Marine Corps. When I had a 40-man platoon, I had a very small view of the Marine Corps. It was just to provide 6-man units for deployment. And then all of a sudden, I'm following around with a general, and we're talking to entire divisions of 20,000 Marines and things of that nature. So it really was an education as much as an adventure, my second tour. So those would be my answers, being a reconnaissance platoon commander and being an aide for a 2-star.
And I mean, that sounds really interesting. And it certainly opens up, as you said, lots of doors. What led you to decide, 9 years, a little over 9 years, why take a detour and try something else? Why go into the FBI?
Yeah, good question. Two reasons. I had two small children, and
Okay.
most Marines are always looking for a way to limit the deployments, limit the amount of time gone from home because you
Mm,
miss out on those early childhood years.
yeah.
So I knew from common sense that I could leave the Marines, join another profession, and not deploy all the time. But I was only willing to do that if I could find the right job with the right pay, with the right job satisfaction, something that gave me the same pride that I woke up every day being a Marine. I would have that as an FBI agent. So
Mm,
that's the first part of that. But also the second part is you got to look at the time frame. I left the Marines in 1997 because I was at the Citadel. I missed the first Gulf War of 1990, Desert Storm, if
right.
you will. So now I've spent the last 7 years training, but never deploying, not at least into a combat environment. Of course, I deployed to Okinawa, Korea, and other places around the world.
Hmm.
Every time North Korea would rattle their sabers, we would go stand up in Okinawa and do things to try and make a presence as well. But it just there was nothing on the horizon other than a nuclear war with North Korea that
Right.
that looked promising. And frankly, Marines they enlist and they join because they're looking for a battle with the
That's
bad
right.
guy. And becoming an FBI agent said, look, every day you can go out and fight crime. So it was a way to get back into the fight also, which I didn't see coming. Who could have envisioned 9/11, right?
That's right. That's right. No, that makes a heck of a. I think you mentioned something really important. Is that term pride? Because no doubt, uh, every Marine has that feeling of pride like no other. That sense of brotherhood. And even you'll see that certainly in the special operations. There's that true sense of camaraderie and brotherhood and team spirit. And I could just imagine, if you're going from the Marines and looking for an organization where you can feel a sense of that, I would get it makes sense going into the FBI. So, okay. So you graduate. All right. So you get into the FBI. You have to go to the FBI Academy. Um, and so you graduate and you're assigned to the Atlanta field office and you get placed in the organized crime squad. Now, before I go any further with this question, um, I mean, I know that if I was going to endeavor to become an FBI agent, man, organized crime squad sounds like the place to be. That sounds exciting. That if you're going to talk about getting out there and crime fighting, that's like the peak up there. So how did you end up getting that? I mean, isn't that reserved for like you got to be there a while? And how do you get
Right,
that? How do you get into that?
right. Yeah, I would like to say that they selected me because of my outstanding Marine Corps resume, and they said this guy's the best. We're going to take him. But my supervisor, who's still my friend today, Kenny Powers, once told me how I ended up on that squad, and it kind of took the air out of my ego, if you will. That squad, Lawrence, had just stood up. The Atlanta division traditionally had never had an organized crime squad because the divisions are able to create squads that are appropriate for their AOR and for the crimes that they're seeing in their community. So while Atlanta, for example, had one drug squad, Miami had 12 drug squads, right? And
Yep.
we get it. New York had half a dozen organized crime squads. So Atlanta had never had an organized crime squad, but we were learning that we had problems in Atlanta, and in response to that, the boss decided to stand up a squad.
Okay.
And he hired Kenny to be his new supervisor. Well, what Kenny did is he went out and grabbed some of the best from the office. And then the boss said, well, wait a minute, you're stealing all the good guys from the other squads. And Kenny Powers said, well, I still need about four more agents to fill out my manpower. And the decision was made you'd get the next four agents out of the academy, brand new guys. Well,
Okay.
I was one of those four. So by the luck of the draw,
Okay.
I end up on the organized crime squad. And I say this and I mean it sincerely. It's good to be lucky.
Yeah, that I
Yeah.
mean, what a way to start out. But uh, you So you're part of this new organized crime squad in the Atlanta office, specifically investigating La Cosa Nostra, right? And if we're talking organized crime squad, is that just La Cosa Nostra, or La Cosa Nostra is one element of organized crime?
Yeah, just like I mentioned to you earlier, where each division is able to shape their needs within the squad, with what kind of squads they need. Los Angeles has 5 bank robbery squads, because Los Angeles is the bank robbery capital of America, or at least it used to be back in the day. So on that squad, we created an organized crime squad, but we also shaped it as we needed. And the threats in Atlanta at the time was the LCN, La Cosa Nostra, was the Asian organized crime, and the emerging Russian organized crime. So those are the three organized crime families that we investigated, or organizations that we investigated in Atlanta, was LCN, Asian, and Russian. I was specifically on the LCN side of the house. Others on my squad worked the other violations.
Gotcha. Okay. So, um, here's the thing. It- Given that the La Cosa Nostra, otherwise known as the mob, right, or basically the mafia, and although there's many different mafias, right, but anyone, especially those from New York, when you hear mafia, it's the five families that are typically
Right.
associated, right? So going into this, did did any of the squad that Kenny put together, did you guys, again, since everyone, who, when you hear La Cosa Nostra and you think of the five families, everyone really thinks of New York. They don't really understand. Most people wouldn't understand that actually the tentacles are everywhere, right? It could be, there's the Kansas City mob, there's the Tampa mob, there's the, right, like there you got different elements. But did you guys have did Kenny Powers pull together a team from New York, or that had experience with the New York mob? What did you guys know about that before, kicking this thing off?
Yes, absolutely. That was probably the wisest thing he did. He grabbed two individuals, particularly on the LCN side. He grabbed John Simmons, who was my initial training agent, that at the time was almost a 30-year veteran, a Hoover agent, as we like to say. He had actually come on board
Mhm.
when John Hoover was still the director of the FBI.
Wow.
And by the time he came on board in 70, I came aboard. He had 27 years in the FBI when he gets the job to train me. But during those 27 years, he had worked almost exclusively organized crime. He
Okay.
had worked Donnie Brasco case down in New York
Wow.
in the mid 70s. He had worked Wise Guys in Miami in the 80s. And now he was in Atlanta in the 90s. And then Kenny also went and got John Accavelli, who had just transferred from New York, having worked the John Gotti Sr. case as a member of the
Awesome.
Gambino squad in New York. So you take those two guys to bring their institutional knowledge onto the squad, and then you get guys like myself who are just willing to go do whatever you tell me to do. Then we had a good team. They were the brains, and we were the horses. We went out and did the work, so to say.
That's right. Set the Marines loose. No, that's great. Um, so again, can getting back to, so you got the expertise, that's for sure. I mean, what you just named there is that's real. Those are deep credentials, when it comes to investigating the mob. But again, really, if you're talking La Cosa Nostra and you're talking the families, you typically talk in New York. Why was Atlanta all of a sudden such a significant hub, such that they had to stand up an organized crime, an LCN unit? What was going on in
Yeah.
Atlanta at the time?
Well, there's a couple answers to that question. When I mentioned to you earlier that we also worked Asians and Russians, the reason that we had that growing influence in Atlanta is the airport. The Atlanta airport is the largest and the busiest airport in the world to this day, and it
Okay.
had just taken that title in the mid to late 90s. And the byproducts of having that much traffic coming through a city is almost incalculable.
Hmm.
And or crime is one of them. And the fact that you can fly from Atlanta anywhere in the world direct and vice versa has an influence on a city, both positive and negative. And so, with this emerging Asian community, specifically Vietnamese and Russian community,
Hmm.
um, just like the Italians did 100 years ago back in New York, the criminals feed on themselves. If you speak the language, you know the culture. When you break into a house and the victims are speaking Vietnamese, you better be able to speak Vietnamese if they want to tell you where the money's hidden. It doesn't do any good for a white guy to break into a Vietnamese house or business if I can't communicate with them.
Good point.
So you see historically that criminals prey on their own culture. And that's exactly what La Cosa Nostra did in New York in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s.
Hmm.
Primarily, their initial victims were all Italians. They spoke the language, they knew the culture, and et cetera. So we had that going on. We had this Russian and Asian thing going on that was heavily influenced because of the interstates, but primarily because of the airport that ran through Atlanta. But that did not explain how we had this all of a sudden traditional Italian organized crime or LCN
Hmm.
influence. And that was the adult entertainment business, frankly. The city of Atlanta, or specifically the state of Georgia, was one, and I believe it still is, only three states that allow full nudity and full alcohol inside their strip clubs.
Mm.
And the city of Atlanta really thrived on that. The 1996 Olympics came and then they went. Now you have, let's say, 10,000 empty hotel rooms in the city of Atlanta every night. How am I going to fill up if I'm a politician in the city of Atlanta? How am I going to fill those hotel rooms up? I'm going to make Atlanta a destination place for conventioneers.
Mm.
Who are conventioneers? They're mostly males.
Yep.
What am I going to do that makes Atlanta more attractive than Tampa or Cleveland or Lincoln, Nebraska? I'm not only they've all got strip clubs. Well, I'm going to make my strip clubs better for those men who are coming in out of town for the conventions. And that's not me exaggerating, Lawrence. I don't know what it is today, but for 20 years and up until I retired, you could go to the City of Atlanta official Visitors Bureau website,
Hmm.
and there would be an active hyperlink on there to the local strip clubs in town. The City of Atlanta
There you go.
promoted. So there was a little ditty that said, "Hey, sex sells, and the City of Atlanta sells sex."
Wow.
And so when you have the adult entertainment business blowing up, let's say strip clubs blowing up in the city of Atlanta, now you see why the wise guys had their hands in it, because historically, going back to Las Vegas, going to New York, with modern day like Scores, for example,
Hmm.
any business that is heavily, and this is the late 90s, the mid 90s, so cash is still king. Any business that's heavy in cash and is a quasi legal business where we know there's going to be some criminality in it just by design, then the mob's going to get involved in that. And so the ability to skim off large amounts of money out of an already shady business it's just prime territory. And so Atlanta at one time had 20 strip clubs that met the definition of what I just told you: full nudity,
Wow.
full alcohol, and the wise guys were getting a piece of that.
That makes so much sense. So I love what you said about on the on the on the travel bureau site. Welcome to Atlanta. You got the hyperlinks. That's amazing. So, all right. So Atlanta becomes known as a hub for strip clubs with as you said, with more venues than any other city in America probably. But the Gold Club in particular, this one stands out as the highest grossing strip club in the country, and eventually draws the attention of of your squad due to its ties with the mafia. Can you kind of provide, I guess, a little bit of background on this 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 system where you've got the strip club, right? And you've got the the attachment of the criminal element. But how does it get when you let's talk about the Gold Club in particular? How does it get to a point where it's drawing the FBI's attention? Because I mean, there's strip clubs everywhere.
Right.
They're all cash business. Well, they're not all cash. I shouldn't say that. But as you just described, right? Like that's something that's going on in every city in America. And there is so much criminal activity when it comes to organized crime. How does a strip club end up catching the eye of the FBI?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we don't have a strip club squad, right?
That,
We don't just investigate strip clubs. I mentioned to you earlier John Accavelli,
yes.
and John once gave me this quote, and he regretted giving me this quote because I started saying it over and over, and he's like, "Ah, I wish you wouldn't say that all the time," but it's true. He said this. He said, "Look, if the mob is spitting on the sidewalk, then the FBI is investigating spitting on the sidewalk. So whatever they're doing, that's what we're investigating, which is as an FBI agent, that's good. And it's good because it gives me a lot of tools that I can go after. If I'm just working bank fraud,
Mhm.
accounting, pump and dumps on Wall Street, I have a limited set of tools that I can charge guys with. It's going to be in the white collar accounting realm.
Right.
But in my career, I was able to charge guys in the wise guys and in part in the club business with everything from white collar crime to violent crime and everything in between, such as corrupting police officers and et cetera. So whatever they're doing, that's what we're investigating. So when we found out that the new owner, the night starting in 1994, the new owner of the Gold Club, which was already a successful club, but it wasn't the success that you just mentioned. It had not yet become the premier strip club in America. When it became owned by Steve Kaplan, who was a high level Gambino associate, we
Mhm.
found out about that. And now we said, guess what? I guess we're in the strip club business. If he'd have been a car lot dealer, then we would have been investigating car lots. If he'd have been, a guy on Wall Street doing day trading, I guess we would have been investigating that because he was a Gambino associate at the highest level. He had been in crews that everybody knew by name, and they were the highest money makers in the Gambino family. And so we just got into the business that way. He's spitting on the sidewalk. That's what we're investigating.
Yeah, listen, that makes sense. Yeah, so okay, so diving into this a bit more, as you talk about in the book, historically, many FBI investigations were successfully prosecuted with the assistance of a well-placed undercover agent, right? However, in the Gold Club investigation, this approach wasn't an option. As you talk about in the book, the Bureau would never sign off on a female agent posing as a stripper.
Right.
Maybe at least not back then. But at that point, despite having only 1 year of FBI experience, you said you learned a critical lesson. I'm going to quote you here. You say the best agents with the best cases have the best informants. So you understood that the key to developing a strong informant was identifying individuals with direct access to the, as you call it, the inner sanctum of a criminal organization, and then delivering a careful. And then you would go once you identified who could be a good informant, good mole. Then you had to go and pitch them, right? You had to pitch them on actually agreeing to do this, which most people would not, it's the last thing you want to do, right? Because I mean, that could be it for you. But you say that you ended up developing, a carefully crafted, what you called an informant pitch. So I'd love to hear more about that pitch, right? Like, given how dangerous it is to inform on the mafia, especially for someone who isn't facing maybe a long prison stretch. Because if they are, maybe then you have actually, you have that lever. But what kind of approach would actually convince someone to become an informant for the FBI
I
against the mafia?
did.
Against the mafia.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Which inherently is dangerous. Right. I did have a crafted pitch, but I actually had a couple because I had to be able to shift and change depending upon who my audience was. But at their essence, they were similar. You mentioned it just a few moments ago, Lawrence. Yeah, it's easy when what we call when we have a hammer over a guy that he's going to prison. Hey, I want to work off some of this time. I'll cooperate and I'll help you out any way I can. That's classic 101 law enforcement. You pinch a little drug dealer and he rolls over on the bigger drug dealer, and you just keep working yourself up the food chain.
Right.
Um, and we did have a couple of examples of that in our case, but it wasn't what drove the case from an intelligence perspective. Mostly me, which later became an issue at trial by the defense attorneys. I developed informants within the female employment base, or frankly, the strippers or the dancers there, because that club was 90% female as far as the employees go.
Mm.
The other 10% is going to be your male management, your bartenders, your bar backs, your maintenance guys pushing a broom, valets. But that's still in a club that size. They had 100 girls running through on a Friday night. Yeah.
Wow.
They had multiple stages. You've got thousands of males inside the club. You need 100 girls to work all these schedules because they're open till 4 a.m. And
Okay.
business will start hopping mid-afternoon. So you're running about 12 hours of high-level strip club business. You're going to need employees to pull that off.
Right.
So there was a huge female database that had been permitted with the city of Atlanta. City of Atlanta did require permits and background checks on employees. Not so much because the city of Atlanta wanted to do the right thing. It was just another way to tax those employees, because to go and get your permit to work if you're a female and you want to dance in a club, you got to go pay $200 to get an adult permit in mid 1990s money. So it was another revenue base for the city of Atlanta. So, we talked about earlier how the city of Atlanta made money by allowing clubs to thrive in their community. And so that would bring in the conventioneers. Well, not only was that true, but once those clubs started, then the city of Atlanta was able to tax those clubs through permits and other forms as well, the employees, the owners, the businesses, the liquor license, and et cetera. So it was a never ending stream of income for everybody. I would sit down with girls that I would locate in the community in a variety of different ways. They would either perhaps be on probation, so they did have a little bit of a hammer on them already. They had maybe had a bad check charge, maybe some drug possessions, and now they were on probation with the state of Georgia. They had gotten a probated sentence. Maybe they had gone to prison, maybe they had gone to jail, but normally not. Normally they had gotten a first offender's probated sentence. I also found girls that did not have a criminal background, did not have a criminal history, but through my informant pipeline, I had learned that they were disenfranchised by the Gold Club. They were on the outs. They wouldn't perform prostitution. They wouldn't sell drugs. So therefore, they fell out of favor with the club. And so they resented that because the club was a great opportunity for a 23-year-old girl to make a lot of money. And just because she wouldn't sleep with someone, now she's lost that opportunity. Right. So they resented that. So what I had to do was find the motivations behind these ladies that danced and worked at the club, and then try to appeal to that motivation. And that motivation is either to stay out of trouble, or that motivation is to do what I called the patriotic thing to do. And look, if you want revenge on this club, that's fine by me. I won't judge you. You want to tell me what's going on, and later I'll use that as a hammer on these guys. At the end of the day, you win. You're getting your pound of flesh out of them, if you will. But probably more times than not, it went like this, Lawrence. It was, look, the worst kept secret in Atlanta is that the owner of the Gold Club is Steve Kaplan, a Gambino associate. You know, and I know that type of publicity is going to bring law enforcement heat. Well, here I am. The FBI is now talking to you, an employee of the club, because the heat is here. And even though you may only be 23 years old, from your life experiences, from reading it in the newspaper, watching it on a television show, or just common sense, You know where this is going to end. One day, a band of FBI agents are going to run out of a vehicle and they're going to storm that vehicle, going to storm that club. We're going to do a search warrant. We're going to find drugs. We're going to find this. We're going to find that. And there's going to be a big takedown, as we like to say. We all know where this is going to end someday, somewhere, somehow. And then when all the dust is settled, the question is, where are you going to be? You, the lady that I'm talking to, where are you going to be in all of this? Are you going to be someone that the FBI already knows about, that is cooperating, is helping, has done the right thing, as we like to say? Or are you going to be someone who is, hey, I'm going to protect these guys because they're helping me make money, and therefore I'm going to be loyal to them? No amount of loyalty to that club is going to protect you from a charging instrument such as an indictment or a set of handcuffs. So you need to make up your mind right now. And they all knew where it was going to end. They were smart. The smartest folks on the streets are the ones who work in those type of clubs and work in nighttime businesses, whether it be legitimate discos or nightclubs or strip clubs and et cetera. And they always are looking over their shoulder. And in my case, there I was. And it didn't take a lot of begging and pleading. It's just lay it out there, present the facts, do the right thing. And more times than not, they did.
Yeah, fair enough. Obviously, you also have to have the right persona to be able to deliver that, to have that conversation,
Right.
because delivered in the wrong way, and you're definitely not gonna get what you're looking for. So there has to be some kind of, and yeah. So I'm wondering, is there, you know, so this kind of goes along with my next question. So we'll make it a two-parter. So you're a rookie FBI agent, uh, and you find yourself, you know, interviewing a wide range of witnesses. So, and speaking to not just the strippers and trying to get some great informants, uh, but also some of the biggest sports superstars of the time: Charles Oakley, Dennis Rodman, Pat Ewing. Uh, they're all tied to the Gold Club case in some way, and many more. Many young agents might feel intimidated in these situations. Again, you haven't been on the, in the FBI for a decade, let
That's
alone
right.
you haven't been on the organized crime squad, right? So it's like this your first year, and so you got all of these superstars. Um, so many young agents might feel really intimidated in these situations, facing individuals who could be domineering, antagonistic, just plain aloof and arrogant. Um, right? Like, I mean, you got Rodman there. That you got to be square, which you do. You got to square. You're squaring off with Dennis Rodman, and you want to talk about acting aloof or acting like weird. You had to deal with that. So, what if anything prepared you for these high pressure interviews? Number one, so it's a two part. One, where do you get the skill to have this conversation as a rookie with, to convince an informant? That's number one. Number two, where do you get the skill set to have a conversation with Dennis Rodman?
Okay. My age worked to my advantage. So the inexperience that you mentioned, the guy I'm sitting across the table with doesn't necessarily know that I've only been on the job for a year or two or three.
True.
So can I present myself as someone who is in the know, someone who has self-confidence, someone who's respectful, but yet, hey, this guy appears to be the real deal. This guy, meaning me, is sitting across the table. My age just naturally, I think, creates a rapport with everybody you just mentioned, because most of those people, or give or take 10 years one way or the other, we're the same age. We're certainly within the same generation.
Mm,
So my training agent, John Simmons, now had 27, 30 years in the FBI. He come from a different culture. He looked older. He smoked a pipe. He was your grandfatherly type of figure.
mm,
So when he sits down with a female that's 25 years old, she sees her father figure
yeah.
sitting there. It's a lot harder to confess your sins to your father than it is to confess your sins to a co-equal, if you
Mm,
will. When it came to the sports figures who came later in the case, once the case became public, and we're talking about grand jury interviews and things of that nature, again, I think it's a combination of everything I just said, of age, and then also, like most males of that era, I was a sports fan. I could talk enough where I didn't come across as the nerdy fan and someone who was just enthralled because, hey, that's Patrick Ewing, a member of the Dream Team.
Mm-hmm.
But I certainly knew basketball, and I could break the ice, and I could say things and hold a conversation in and around sports to maybe build a little bit of rapport. He's maybe 5 years older than me at the time, so we have that generational thing going on as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then perhaps the most important thing of them all is just the ability to have people skills.
Right.
There's this debate. It starts at officer training for Marines. Do you have leadership skills, or are you born with them, or do you develop them? When it comes to people skills, are you born with them, or do you develop them? And you'll never get a consensus on what the answer is. Everybody has their own opinion. Leaders are naturally born. No, I know guys that were quiet and humble, and were followers in the beginning, and then later became the best leaders because they learned from others. And all of those stories are valid. I don't know what the answer is, but I felt like I had the people skills based on my life experiences of everything from being a quarterback on a successful high school football team, which by design is a natural leadership position.
Yep.
By joining the Marines, which requires you to be both a member of a team and to be a leader at the same time. Maybe my own personal skills of being a reader. Readers are leaders and leaders are readers is a common Marine Corps theme as well. If you take all of these little ingredients that I'm saying to you, all these life experiences, all of these people skills, all of the things you're born with, all the things that you acquire that the Marine Corps taught you, that life taught you, et cetera, you throw them in, now you have the recipes for being able to have conversations with people, quite frankly. The more skill set you bring to the table, some way, somehow, you're going to find something that relates and builds rapport with that person sitting across the table from you.
Right.
It's easy to come in with the hammer and be the tough guy. We've all seen those television shows of the detective that, throws his badge down on the ground and says, this is who I am, or on the table, this is who I am, and you better cooperate, or blah, blah, blah. And sometimes that works, but more times than not, it doesn't. And so that's my long-winded answer to your question on 1A, is those people skills are developed through a variety of reasons. When it came to those athletes, part 2, they one of the things that money does for you, for the most part, it allows you to go out and get good lawyers to defend you. And when you get good legal representation, they're going to be honest with you, and they're going to tell you if you're screwed or not, quite frankly. Okay. And so what we saw was a theme here that, look, the lawyers were telling their clients, the FBI can charge you and probably win on a variety of charges, primarily prostitution, and think about how embarrassing that would be, for example. Or you can take their letter of immunity, just tell them the truth, be a witness if they need you to, and then be done with this and move on with your life. And more times than not, those superstars that you mentioned took their attorney's advice. They cooperated. They were at least willing to sit down and tell the truth, whether it was reluctant or not, they did it. And I was able to have build rapport and have conversations with them. And I knew my case, Lawrence. I knew, right now we're just talking about one predicate violation. In this case, it's the prostitution. And there was others, from loan sharking to credit card fraud to paying off police officers. But in this case, I knew my case. And I knew when a guy or a girl sit down across the table from me, I knew if they were guilty of certain things because I'd talked to so many other people and I had looked at so many other tapes and listened to so many other recordings. I knew what was going on in that club, so that the person across the table couldn't lie to me and get away with it. I was able to call their bluffs. And real quickly, when that happened, when they did try and lie to me, they realized this isn't going to work. So it's either just shut up and don't talk at all, or just tell me the truth, but don't lie to me. And they will respect that, and they'll know that you're diligent and that you're competent, and all those things fit together. And it worked for me.
Powerful. Yeah, you know, in some respects, when you put that all together, you came in with that package. Maybe Kenny Powers and that squad got lucky bringing you on as one of those four rookies, just as much as you got lucky, right?
Well, I appreciate that.
So, okay, in the book you talk about. So I'm gonna quote you here. You say in 2000, I overheard a statement that forever influenced my FBI career. The words were spoken by Assistant United States Attorney Art Leach while he was reassuring a frightened witness. The 25-year-old woman had previously worked at the Gold Club and also had a romantic relationship with the club's general manager. She was soon going to testify, and she was terrified. And she said, "What if the defense attorney is mean to me?" Art says, "Don't worry, I will object if he's unprofessional." And then she says, "What if the defense attorney doesn't believe my answers and continues to harass me?" Art says, "Remember this one thing. You were there, he was not. Just tell your story." And you say, Mark, you say, "Here I learned not to let other people control the narrative, certainly if they were not present during the event. Remember this one thing, you were there." So, the power of truth, many people forget, I believe many people forget how powerful the truth is because of how often it's twisted and maligned. So what I'm wondering is I mean, other than it being good advice, why did that statement make such an impact on you, such that you said, it forever influenced your career?
Yeah. And as you are recanting that story, it still strikes me as powerful today as it was back then. Because it's simple, Lawrence. The confidence of the truth is unmistakable. When I stood in front of juries and recanted what I had seen, what I had heard firsthand, juries believe that. They just know from a guy, this is not hearsay. This is not something somebody told me. This is not something I learned. This is something I saw, I did, I experienced. And that level of intimacy with the truth is unmistakable. And juries appreciate that. Judges appreciate that if we're talking about from a law enforcement perspective. Prosecutors certainly appreciate that. But in life, no matter what your venue is, that's going to be applicable. If I'm the guy that's got the experience of doing this, then who better else to tell you the story or to show you how to do it? So in the case of that 25-year-old girl, who better else, who better to tell the judge the story? This was a pre-trial hearing, so there was not a jury in the box. So the judge was going to make a decision based on what the witnesses were saying in a motion that had been filed before him. How better for that judge to make that decision than for that young lady to turn around and the best way she can while she's in the witness stand, look straight at the judge, look at the prosecutor at the same time, and tell her story from firsthand experience with the confidence that comes from firsthand experience. Because when you receive that cross-examination from the defense attorney is working off a list of questions and a paradigm of what he's been told, of what his client told him or what somebody else told him. He has no idea what the truth is because he wasn't there. Okay. There's never been a defense attorney that was there the night that the murder happened. There's never been the OJ defense attorneys weren't there that night on the sidewalk in Los Angeles. They don't know what happened. All right. So if you have witnesses, and this girl was a witness who was there, that level of confidence is unmistakable. And I just took that with me, no matter what. It's maybe the one word synonym is confidence. that I would give as the answer to your question.
Hmm. Again, I, I think you mentioned something so important, because the truth can give you confidence. And I think the power of the truth gets discounted a lot these days. Uh, and if you're just willing to be humble and have humility and just tell it like it is and be truthful, then you don't have to worry anymore about, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I don't say it the right way? What if this happens? Because as you said, you're telling the truth. You can be confident, and people will recognize it. It will resonate with people.
Let me give you another example, if I may, and you can
Yeah.
apply it to the battlefield. You can apply it to the military because I will and I have. Take something as simple as jumping out of an airplane,
Hmm.
being a paratrooper. When you stand in front of a jump master who has 100 jumps under his belt, there's going to be a level of confidence that he's going to present to you on, hey, man, this is the way we're going to execute this jump today and tonight. And then there's also going to be a level of confidence that you're going to have in that jump master because you realize this guy's got 100 jumps under his belt and all of his legs are straight and he's obviously done something right. He knows what he's talking about. So that same person that stands up there and has that confidence of I was there, I did it, I know what I'm talking about, applies to all spectrums of whether you're turning wrenches on a at a mechanic's garage on an engine. That guy has worked on those type of engines before. He knows what to do. And if anyone wants to ask him, whether it be the customer or a coworker, how to do it, his level of confidence is going to present itself because he's been there, he's done it.
Powerful, powerful. Um, okay, so again, this is your first major case. It's your first case, right? I mean, it's your first case, I think. Um, you're just a year into the FBI. Essentially, you said, I think you called it an accidental agent, assigned to one of the most complex and high profile organized crime investigations in Atlanta. Full stop. Yet, despite your lack of prior mob investigation experience, your colleagues, John Simmons, John Iacovelli, and Frank Graciano, they all agreed. This is impressive. This is amazing. They all agreed that you should be credited with securing Steve Kaplan's guilty plea, which is, I mean, that's a significant acknowledgement within the organized crime squad or anywhere within the FBI, to basically get that scalp. It's your first case. It's a massive case, and you did so well that all the experienced guys are like, no, let's on this point here, let's give Mark the win on this. So how does someone so early in their career take a case filled with landmines, the violence, the corruption, and people are going to have to read the book because you get dragged into this case. You're not just on the sidelines doing the investigating. Once it gets to trial, you get dragged in. And there become all kinds of instances based on how good you were at getting those informants, some of those girls, to work with you, to really share and to be honest. So you get dragged into this case, and they try and the defense attorneys try to besmirch you. They try your credibility. So again, they make you an important part of their defense strategy. Doesn't work. So you're going to have to read the book here because this stuff gets wild. But having to go through all that, to earn that level of respect from seasoned agents is quite a thing. How does that happen on your first case? To make again, for any amateur starting out a career in any field, this is good advice such that you could walk away with that notch in your belt. How does that happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I often forget how humbling that is. And then when you read that and you remind me of it, it still is, to use your word, it still is powerful today because I hold those three names that you just mentioned in high esteem. They're not only great investigators, they were great people. And we're all friends today. We're in a group text, and I see them on a fairly regular basis. And I just really value their opinions. And for the two older guys, they were mentors. So a couple things happened, Lawrence. One is at the end of the day, the bad guy pleads guilty to a certain amount of charges. Basically, there was a negotiated plea where he said, okay, you got me on this. I'll plead guilty. I'm not pleading guilty to this one because I don't think your evidence is strong enough and you couldn't win it at trial, but I will plead guilty to this because I've heard the evidence and you got me, and so on and so on. The things that the bad guy, the premier bad guy, Steve Kaplan, pled guilty to were charges and violations that I was responsible for investigating. We had divided the case up among ourselves. John Simmons took New York, Miami. John Iacovelli took New York. Frank took some of the violations in Atlanta, and I took some other violations in Atlanta. And those violations that occurred in Atlanta were the ones that ultimately Steve Kaplan pled guilty to. And so my teammates were not oblivious to that. So they wanted to give credence there. But I think more than anything else, other than the obvious, was that if somehow, some way, there was some master list of who burned the most hour, the midnight oil and so forth, I would have won that competition, if you will. It's good to be young. And, this is my first case, and I'm going to get out there and do it. And that means I'm meeting with people at 2, 3, and 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm back up at 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning and starting the day again, and so on and so on. Remember, this case started in 97 and went to trial in 01. So that's a 4-year span of burning the midnight oil, so to say. And I think my teammates appreciated that. They saw how hard I worked, that my work was successful, that it did lead to the charges that Steve Kaplan pled guilty to. And that does not mean they had to choose for me to get the stat on Steve Kaplan's conviction. It could have went to the senior case agent, and everybody would have been okay with that too, because that's kind of the way it works in agencies. The senior guy gets the stat, but they chose to give it to me, and I'm forever humbled.
Yeah, no, that's amazing because, again, as you said, a lot of people would have assumed, that and you see it all the time. You see it in business. You see it in, in the service. People take the credit that, the workhorses put in, and, you become the silent, quiet, humble type. You don't brag, you don't boast, but you don't get that credit sometimes. So that's pretty, you work with a group of pretty amazing people, that they were able to put that aside and give that to you and recognize that. So that's pretty powerful. So, okay, 4 years of your life, right? Like that's everything. And now you got to get on to doing other things. And I mean, you did some other pretty wild things, pretty amazing things. And so I guess one of them I'd like to know a bit more about is you spent a significant amount of time investigating outlaw motorcycle gangs, right? Like, I mean, so you go from the mob, right? These guys are wearing suits, man, nice haircuts, manicured, right? Like everything, like they present a certain way, and they conduct their business in a very, I don't know if maybe civilized manner is the way the world sees it, like that old school mafia. You just have that image, right? You think of The Godfather in the movie, right? And you just see the way they do things. And then you think of outlaw motorcycle gangs, and you're thinking about, right, like what's it called, the Sons of Anarchy, right?
Right.
That's what if you want to, if you want to know about motorcycle gangs and what that's all about, you check out, everyone's impression is from shows like that. So, what was it like investigating the motorcycle gangs in Atlanta? What was that all about?
Yeah, I just had this conversation coincidentally with someone else recently, and we talked about the comparisons there. So for background, you mentioned how the difference in the appearance was between wise guys and outlaws, for example, motorcycle gang members. And I'll give you a good example. So after the Gold Club, I'm still working wise guys, and I work a case against a particular individual who is the number one pornographer in the city of Atlanta, who's tied into the Bonanos.
Okay.
And this guy was, it's the first time I ever heard the term metrosexual. Okay. Got his nails done, he wore the best clothes, but it wasn't just your traditional coat and tie, right? It was just it was the cool stuff that people had his hair gelled. This guy he was good looking young guy. And then I moved to North Georgia. So what I did after my 10-year mark in Atlanta, Lawrence, is I volunteered to take a transfer to a small 4-man office up in North Georgia.
Okay.
The FBI has these small offices around every state. So, you've got an office there in, let's take New York, for example, but you're also going to have small ones out in the hither towns,
Yeah,
whatever that might be.
that's right.
Uh, not just,
Upstate New York.
not just,
Yeah,
yeah, not just Albany and Buffalo, but even towns smaller than that.
right.
And, and so Georgia certainly had those. And little small town up in the top right hand corner of the state near the Carolinas, we had a 4-man office. Well, there's
Okay.
no wise guys up there, right? So my wise guy days are over with of investigating the mob. But what we did have up there, because that's in the Appalachian Mountains, it's very beautiful. It really is kind of an unknown jewel in America in that mountain range there. It was great to ride your motorcycles,
Mm.
and there was a lot of motorcycle activity there, which naturally inevitably leads to turf battles. And Georgia is a outlaw state. When what that means is, you talked about the 5 families of the wise guys,
Hmm.
where there's the big 4 in motorcycle gangs. There's the Outlaws, the Hells Angels, the Pagans, and the Banditos. Okay,
Interesting.
and they have territories, just like New York is perhaps divided up by areas among the 5 families. The southeastern United States is outlaw country. And so the Outlaw Motorcycle Club owned Georgia. And with that came a headquarters chapter or a clubhouse in Atlanta. But to build their presence, they like to have offices, if you will, or little clubhouses all around the state. So
Okay.
they're always out trying to push their logo out further and further. And that had been pushed up into the North Georgia area where I was at. And one reason for that, Lawrence, is because South Carolina, coincidentally, it's kind of an anomaly, but South Carolina is a Hells Angels state. So it's surrounded by North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia, which are all outlaw states. But right there in the middle, South Carolina is a Hells Angels state. And so the outlaws are always thinking ahead, and they didn't want the Hells Angels to try and come into Georgia. So the more I could push clubhouses out to their borderline, the
Hmm.
better. It's like you want to put your forces as close to the enemy lines as you can. And that's what we were seeing up in North Georgia. And I jumped on it as an opportunity because I knew that inevitably, two things. These guys are already involved in criminal activity, because you can almost take my example of earlier. If an outlaw is spitting on the sidewalk, I'm investigating spitting on the sidewalk, because those guys generally are not holding down 9-to-5 jobs. They're generally involved in criminal activity to support their lifestyle. And then number 2, it was inevitable that violence was going to happen because we were so close to South Carolina that there
Okay.
was going to be this Hells Angels clash. So I wanted to be preemptive and get in front of this. This was a threat that was emerging and no one was handling it at the time. So I decided to do it. And one reason I decided to do it, other than the obvious, is we've talked about ethnic criminal enterprises already. We've talked about Asians and we've talked about Russians,
Hmm.
and we talked about, I don't know what the appropriate term would be. Let's just say American white guys.
Okay.
Okay. Generally, those organizations run differently than each other. So, and the color of your skin and your ethnic background is important on how you're going to do business. It's just inevitable. So I can have American born and bred motorcycle gang members.
Hmm.
They're going to have a strong organized structure to their criminal enterprise, just like the Gambinos, just like the Bonanos. There's going to be a boss. There's going to be an underboss. There's going to be an enforcer. There's going to be chapter presidents. They're going to be very structured. So from an investigative perspective, that's easier for me to investigate. One, because I already had that experience.
Right.
And two, it's just natural for moving up the chain of command till you get to the boss.
Mm,
In the other ethnic groups or color of your skin groups, you can go out to LA and you
hmm
can take the Crips and the Bloods, who are just as American as I am, but
hmm
because of their cultural background and the color of their skin, their organization, they choose not to run it as organized as other groups do. So yeah, there's a shot caller and there's a boss in the Crips and the Bloods, but
hmm
underneath him, it's almost chaos. It's everybody out there doing their own thing, running their own racket. There's not a chain of command as organized as you would see in the mob or in the motorcycle gangs. You take your Asian organized crime. There was a shot caller and then everybody was a soldier.
Really?
Same way with the Russians, for example. So the organization that existed in these criminal enterprises of the mob and of the motorcycle gangs was just something that was easy for me to grab a hold of and target for investigation.
So you're saying so the different cultures that make up the different street gangs and the criminal gangs, they all have different ways of orchestrating their structure. And so you're saying that the motorcycle gangs and the mob had similar structures. Is that by accident? Did they model their structure after the mafia, or does it just end up working out that way?
I'm going to go with it worked out that way because if you look at motorcycle gangs, they were birthed shortly after World War II. So
Okay.
their lifespan is very similar to the mafia,
Right.
this circa World War II era and then forward. So that doesn't really tend for copying one of the other because they kind of birthed at the same time. I don't know what creates that culturally or ethnically, but one of our jobs as law enforcement guys is not only to investigate and to win prosecutions, but it's to dismantle the organization. And
Okay.
what I mean by dismantle is if they can't come back and do the same thing again, if they can't just reboot, then you've been successful. Now, we didn't talk about this earlier, but the FBI has been extremely successful in dismantling organized crime, specifically the LCN.
hmm
When you were growing up in New York in the 80s, the mob on a scale of 1 to 10 for their criminal influence was a 10.
Yes,
They ran New York City.
absolutely.
The FBI has been so successful in dismantling that organization that now I put them as a 3. They went from 5 FBI squads investigating one for each family to
hmm
now just one squad investigates all 5 families. Okay, because the threat's not there. Why isn't the threat there? Because the FBI has dismantled. We've taken the boss and the underboss and that structure, that chain of command that
Right.
creates those organizations, that leadership that makes them successful. It's easy to take out the foot soldiers, but when you take out the leadership, that's when you start to dismantle an organization. So what we see in the Crips and the Bloods and the Sureños and the Norteños and any other ethnic group that's different is, yeah, they'll have a boss, but then it's 1,000 soldiers. So you pick off a soldier and a soldier and a soldier, but you haven't touched the boss and you haven't touched the organization. You haven't touched the financial backings of the organization. You haven't taken the leadership away because the boss is so insulated in those type of organizations. But in the mob and in an organized crime, the boss calls all the shots and he passes it down to his underboss and so on and so on. And all that organization comes historically not from each other. They didn't copy each other. The mob didn't copy the motorcycle gangs, but historically from the military and from the traditional Italian organized crime in the country of Italy, that's the way they did business because of the Roman influence. You had your capos who was in charge of 100, and then they were in charge of others and so forth. So there was this pyramid effect. The
hmm
boss was at the top, and then you had others underneath him. It wasn't a straight line like it is in other organizations where there's a boss and then it's down and then it flattens out.
Right.
There is a definite hierarchy. There's a definite chain of command, and you need to be able to start pulling those bricks out of that hierarchy and that structure to make that whole thing collapse.
So the way they organize actually makes them weaker against the FBI in their investigation because you're able to pull out those like the game Jenga. you can pull out those Jenga pieces, and the whole thing collapses. With the criminal street gangs, where, as you said, you have a boss, and then you have the rest are foot soldiers for the most part.
Yes. Yes.
So
So
that makes
there's pros and cons. The way the mob does business, it makes them vulnerable to law enforcement investigation, but
okay.
it also makes them very successful because they take the advantage of strong leadership, and then they pass it down to the next level, and then that guy is in charge of his. So a capo is in charge of his crew.
Hmm.
So it's not just the boss. They're not just going to live and die by one boss. Everybody's got a chance to participate. Not everybody. Most people, the good leaders are going to rise to the top, and they're going to have a chance to influence that organization, as opposed to everybody that's just out there doing their own thing.
Hmm.
Make yeah, I'm wearing the bandana and I've got the tattoo, but I'm really not following a set of rules, or I'm not following the boss's rules for this week, and
Right.
so on. That makes them less successful as a criminal organization, but it does make them more resistant to criminal investigation.
Because it's more diffuse, and so so
Yeah.
it's great for leadership in the criminal street gangs, right? Because it's harder to get at them, whilst on the other hand, the others are organized more like a business, right? And so
Yeah,
you
that's
can,
exactly right.
right, so you
More
can
like a business.
so you can systematically take that apart. The criminal street gangs are more. It's more like it's more renegade, right? It's more right. It's more asymmetric, and so it's much harder to take out an organization like that. So it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Um, Okay, so now you're on the motorcycle. You're going after the motorcycle gangs. So interesting in many ways, although most people wouldn't realize what you learned in taking down organized crime at the level of LCN, Cosa Nostra, is helping you be successful at dismantling these outlaw motorcycle gangs. As you now rank La Cosa Nostra and their power as a criminal organized crime organization, you now rank it a three. What about the motorcycle gangs in America? You said there's four major groups. How would you rank their power?
Yeah, those four major groups are still strong and they're growing. Would be my ranking. Um, it. I can talk about the mob in New York City, and it was a 10. And then you said earlier we got Kansas City and we have Tampa and we have other cities, but these motorcycle gangs are in more cities than that. And in each city, you're going to see a difference in their influence. So if you take if you take Chicago, the Outlaws are going to be a 10 in Chicago
Hmm.
because that's their home chapter. In Atlanta, where I was at, they're probably a 3, 4, 5, somewhere in that range. 10 years ago is where I would rank them. If you go down to Florida, you go to Jacksonville, Florida, where they have a strong presence, I'd give them an 8 or a 9. So it's going to be territorial where they go. Hell's Angels out in California, San Francisco, they're a 10, and so on and so on.
Right.
So it's going to be a little bit more because there's more chapters and they're spread from coast to coast. It's going to be a
Hmm.
little bit more territorial, and you're not going to be able to give one overall rating for the entire organization.
So does La Cosa Nostra still carry a 10 in any major city?
No.
No. So why is it? So here I'm curious. Why is it that the four main clubs, right? You got the five families in La Cosa Nostra, but you got the four clubs in the motorcycle gangs. Why have they actually gotten stronger and actually grown? Again, given they present the structure that enables the FBI to dismantle them effectively, much like
Yeah.
they could organize crime. Why is it that using that same structure, outlaw motorcycle gangs are actually growing in power and spreading?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons for that, and they vary from one another. One is starting in the 50s with the congressional commissions that were held against organized crime, going into the 60s, where we have these famous videos of these mobsters sitting in front of Congress under subpoena and claiming the Fifth Amendment. Are you a member of the mafia? Because they were investigating labor unions, right?
Right.
Congress was, and so forth. Basically Congress said, hey, FBI, this is your priority from here on out is the mob. Go take care of these guys. So we had a congressional mandate to be the lead investigative agency against the mob.
Mhm.
They were public enemy number one, quite frankly, at a congressional level. We don't have that kind of attention given to criminal motorcycle gangs. There's not been a mandate from Congress or from people in political authority to say, hey, FBI, you need to tackle this. So that's one.
Okay.
Two is we've had a cultural shift. It is in the last 40 years, and that can be blamed on television, that can be blamed on social media, but it's no longer as cool as it is to wear the three-piece suit and have slicked back hair as it is to ride the Harley and have the beard and the full sleeve tattoos.
Right. Yeah.
That is much more cool today than the wise guy persona, if you will. Nationwide, it's much more cool. So they have an attraction to other criminals to come join their organizations because it's the new cool place to be.
Mm.
Another thing that motorcycle gangs do that the wise guys didn't do is motorcycle gangs recruit. And here's how they recruit. I told you there's 4 major motorcycle clubs, gangs in America, but
Mhm.
there are hundreds of sub clubs. If you drive down the highway and you're looking for it, you're going to see, well, there goes the Renegades, and there goes the Warlocks, and there goes the Hammer Knives, and there goes this, and there goes the Southern Knights. There goes all these different clubs. Well, I used the baseball analogy when I was taking these cases to trial.
Okay.
Our biggest win in North Georgia is we had a 31 person indictment against a motorcycle gang. The Outlaws were at the top. But in that 31, we didn't have 31 outlaws. We had a handful of outlaws. We had a handful of Southern Knights. We had a handful of Black Pistons. To use the baseball analogy, the Outlaws were the major league club. But what do major league clubs have? They have AAA clubs and AA clubs and single A clubs, the farm system that supports them,
Mm.
right? And so if you're a baseball fan, you learn that, hey, so-and-so got called up to the majors, right? The big 4 do the exact same thing.
Wow.
They form a relationship with a lower club. They give them the arm around the shoulder type of support and pat on the back. They let them be in a hang around status. They get the protection of being with the mother chapter. And then when it's time to recruit, I'm going to pull guys up to the major leagues.
Wow.
They have their own built-in recruiting system.
Powerful. Yeah, that's fascinating. So they got the farm teams that they can pull from.
That's exactly right. And that attraction, to go back to the second point that I told you, that attraction is so strong that if you're in New York and you run up against a wise guy, you're pretty much going to know that guy's connected. You're never going to go back to work or go back home and someone say, hey, you know that guy you met today at work? Did you know he's a soldier in the Gambinos? No, I had no idea. You're going to know there's something different about that guy.
Mm.
But in the world of motorcycle gangs, you can go to your 9 to 5 job and work next to a guy, and you have no idea that when he gets off of work at night, he goes and puts his helmet on. He may wear long sleeves, and you have no idea about his tattoos. And then he rides to the chapter clubhouse that night, and he parties with those guys at night,
Wow.
4 nights a week. And then at the end of the night, he goes back and he does his 9 to 5 job. We arrested guys that were college educated, had good professional
Really?
jobs, and owned their own house with mortgages. That's part of the motorcycle culture today.
Wow. So that's something that, because again, you have the image of the motorcycle gang and the lives they lead. But like you said, complete cultural shift in appearance, in what's considered cool. And yeah, I mean, especially if you're, in your 20s and 30s, if you could hang around with, ride the motorcycle, get involved in some illegal activity, run with an outlaw motorcycle gang, but yet still be able to put on a long sleeve shirt and go to work the next day and earn a living there, and then have that dual life. With, as you said, when it came to the mob, you're,
It
what did they say? You're
is your
you're
life.
yeah, you're either a friend of, he's a friend of mine, or he's a friend of ours. And if you're a friend of
There you go.
ours, right, it's
You're in.
you're a made man, and that's a completely different thing. Yeah. Very, very interesting stuff, man. Okay, pulling back from the actual work that you were doing in the FBI, and man, there's probably so many questions we can get into, so many interesting stories when it comes to this stuff. Um, Toward the end of your career, if I understand correctly, with the FBI, you spent time at Quantico training the next generation of agents. So, love to hear about your role in that pipeline. How did your field experience shape the way you approach training? Tell us a little bit about that.
At the 20-year mark, which would have been July of 19, or excuse me, July of 2017, I was I was eligible to retire.
Okay.
I was 50 years old and I had 20 years in the FBI. I had those two checks. I had in the block. I had 10 years basically of Marine Corps experience. So I'm now looking at about 30 years of federal time combined,
Wow.
and I was eligible to retire. But it had always been a goal of mine to go back to the academy and serve as a field counselor. And what a field counselor is, it's you go and you attach yourself. You're attached to a new agent's class from day one, they're going through their 4 months of training, and you're living with them, you're sleeping with them, you're going to the range with them, you're going to the gym with them. You are their on scene mentor 24/7. And the reason I wanted to do that primarily is because I saw the good and the bad of that when I was going through the academy. I saw the good and bad of that through my Marine Corps training, that if you can get the right mentor that can point you in the right direction, can tell you at training what's really important, and you better pay attention, doubly pay attention to this, as opposed to, hey, that's nice to know, but you'll probably never use it in the field. Those kind of little nuggets are extremely important to know and would be helpful, perhaps, for a new agent. Just to be able to share your knowledge, like so many people did with me in my
Mm.
career, is something that I wanted to do. Not because I had this perceived grandiose image of myself that, look, I've got all this that I can tell you guys, gather around and listen to Yoda talk. It wasn't that way. It
Okay.
was, I'm going to go through this training with you. And if you ask the right questions, I can help you. Or if I see you do something stupid, I can point that out, and so forth. So I stayed on the job for an extra 6 months so I could push this new agents class through.
Okay.
And I'm so glad I did it. I got to see the new training that the academy was putting out 20 years after I had went through the academy. I
Mm-hmm.
got to see up close the new agents that the FBI is hiring. I'm getting to see that today in my current job as well.
Mm-hmm.
But during my career, I had this 20-year separation with new agent training, and now this was a chance to come complete back, maybe where it all started, influence, get a good perspective of it, and it was just a win-win all the way around. I can tell you that we joke, us older guys, we every generation likes to make fun of the younger generation.
Right.
They're not as tough as we were.
Yep.
The World War II vets made fun of the Vietnam vets. The Vietnam vets make fun of the Gulf War vets, and so on and so on. Maybe it's all in good nature, but there's probably some truth there as well. And we used to say, it was popular in the FBI to think, these new agents, they're not near as good as we were when we came through, and so
Right.
forth. But it's just simply not true. The new agents today speak more languages, have more cultural experience. The color of their skin has given them, perhaps, in the right environment, has given them more life experiences than other people have experienced. We're hiring agents today that I know. I trained personally um, a female agent that is Muslim and wears a hijab. and she's an
Wow.
FBI agent. So
The
you think
demographic,
Mr.
the
Yeah,
demographic has changed,
yeah.
right? Like,
Now look, to change demographics for the purpose, for just the sole purpose of changing them is silly.
right.
If you just simply say we need to hire 50 more females this year to make our numbers right, that's silly
Hmm.
because you could get the worst 50 females and make your organization terrible.
Right.
But if we hire the right people and we encourage the right people to apply, everybody wins. So often in my career, for example, when I was working Mexican or Hispanic organizations and we needed language speakers, I had to go to the local police department and ask for, give me a patrol officer off duty that you will give to me, or take him off of duty and let him be my linguist for this operation that's coming
Wow.
up. Because we didn't have any Spanish speakers in the FBI that was available. Maybe we had one or two, but they're far away or they're tied up.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Now, in today's FBI, every fifth agent speaks Spanish, relatively speaking. Okay. And so on and so on. So those cultural backgrounds make our investigations much more diversified. If I'm a, you and I used the example earlier, a blood or a gangs member out in LA. If he
Hmm.
wants to sit down and cooperate with me and confess, is he more likely to do that to me as a white male from Texas,
Right.
all things being equal? Or is he more likely to do that with a black male from Chicago? Right? We
Yeah.
should not be blind to the fact that there are differences, assuming that we all have the baseline skills. Right? And so I was happy to see that we've got educated master's degrees is kind of the norm now for
Okay.
FBI agents coming through the academy. We have, there's certainly agents out there with doctorate degrees,
Wow.
with PhDs. People are walking away from very successful, lucrative careers to be FBI agents. We got NFL football players. I had an I had a Hall of Fame, borderline Hall of Famer in
Yep.
that class that I pushed through, and
Yep.
so on and so on. And the bureau is better for that. So I got to share my knowledge with them, and I learned a little bit as well that we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. So now you get to pull from a vast pool of talent. Uh, and again, like it's changed. Now you've got so many different types of criminal activity from, so again, the mafia dominated, right? The not just the imagination, but a lot of criminal activity at the highest levels, in the 19, post-war, right? That post-war period. And then as what is it? What is it? Power hates a vacuum, right? Something
Okay.
like that. So once you deconstructed the, La Cosa Nostra, it was a free for all, and now so now you got everything from like you said, the criminal street gangs, the Bloods, the Crips, the Norteños. You've got the outlaw motorcycle gangs. You got and everything in between. How does the FBI deal with that when, like you said, if you're going back 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you have anyone even speaking Spanish? Now you can pull from such a diverse medley of really intelligent people
Yeah.
and bring them in, and so you'll have, again, the language skills are so important now. So it's that's really fascinating. It's really promising to see. And you got to see it firsthand as you're training them. So what would you say, again, having been very successful as an agent, and then training that new generation with all the diverse different backgrounds that they have coming in? What would you say makes a great agent? Like, what makes it, like, if you're recruiting, right, for the FBI, what are you looking for? What's going to make a great FBI agent?
Yeah, good question, right? That's the magic formula that we're all looking for. As I recall, you and I talked about this a little off camera previously as
We did.
well. Um, there's not, I don't know that I could put my finger on one thing, but I can tell you a couple of things are more important than others.
Mhm.
I used an analogy earlier about building a recipe, and there's certain things that need to be in that recipe for that final product to perform, taste well, perform, and do what it is that it's supposed to do. And sure, You know, you need to be physically fit. You got to be able to do a certain amount of pull-ups. You got to be able to run your 2 miles in a certain amount of time. You got to be able to shoot straight on the pistol range. You got to have a certain amount of academic prowess to get your college degree and maybe your master's and so on. All of those things are true and they're proven and they're important. But every agent that graduates from the FBI Academy has those things that I just mentioned to you. They can shoot straight, they can run, and they've got a college degree. So how come they don't go on to make the big cases or to be looked upon in their division as, hey, if you want someone to work your case, go get that guy right there. He can help you. Or someone that you want covering your back on the next arrest. What separates the masses from those guys that I'm talking about right now?
Yes.
And then that's where the skills, that's where the secret ingredients get a little bit more select in this recipe that I was talking about.
Okay.
Right? And we talked about it once already. It's going to be people skills. Can you sit down and have a conversation with people? Now, that same generation that I'm telling you has all of these great skills, that the languages and the education and the diversity. We know also that one of the negatives working against that generation is they have less and less people skills because of technology. That's a given, right? When they're working with headsets on like this all day long in their corporate jobs, and they're not face to face, or they're not in a mud hole with someone like the Marines or in a foxhole, that just doesn't lend towards building the people skills of being face to face with someone every day and having to work in a team environment and a personal team environment. You can have a team, but you're all in different cities working by technology. That's going to be different than being in the same room when it's raining on you outside and so forth. So those people skills to be able to work in that environment are terribly important, and one of the 2 or 3 more important of all the skills. And then lastly, it's just work ethic, frankly. I told you this story earlier. Being an FBI agent is difficult. Being a good FBI agent is difficult. And here's what I mean by that. I told you earlier that you're not meeting informants at noon at the Starbucks. You're going to meet them at 2 o'clock behind the Home Depot when all the streetlights go out. And that's when you're going to take the recording device from them or have the secret conversation about what they're going to do next and so forth. Nobody wants to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and do that, Lawrence. You know, right? They've been asleep for an hour or two, and now they get up and go meet a guy that may be a drug dealer behind a Home Depot and, you know, in some shady part of town, night after night after night after night, because that's what it's going to take. That guy, that informant, has that access to that criminal organization. You've identified him through your people skills. You've built rapport with him through your people skills. You have recruited him on board through your people skills. And now your work ethic says the only way you can meet with this guy is at 2 o'clock in the morning. Are you going to create reasons why you can't? Or are you going to create reasons why you can? And that's the difference. So yes, the best agents have the best sources, and therefore they have the best cases. And all 3 of those are inclusive of each other, not exclusive. They're inclusive of each other. And so the ability to just want to work and meet on a Saturday or meet on a Sunday. So maybe, hey, sometimes maybe you have to miss the Little League baseball game. It's up to you to decide which one and how often, but sometimes you have to do it. I know that there are agents who said it doesn't matter how important this case is, I'm not missing that Little League game. And that's okay. That's his choice. I'm sure he'll have great memories of that Little League game. But that same agent can't complain when he realizes he missed the opportunity to work the big case,
right,
or to have the big informant. It is the price we pay. Nothing is free, right? Sleep isn't, I mean, you're going to have to give up sleep. You're going to have to give up personal time and so on and so on. So a very, very strong work ethic and people skills go hand in hand to be a successful agent.
Those intangibles, they make or break you. Yeah, like you said, coming into the FBI, it's a level playing field. You got the education. right? You got that. You got the intelligence, you got the physical fitness, you got all these things. That's just baseline. That's just
Yes,
baseline. It's those intangibles. And it's interesting, again, if you're talking work ethic and people skills, I mean, that's not just going to take you to the heights of the FBI. It's going to take you to the heights of business. It's going to take you to the heights of politics. It's going to take you to the heights of any chosen endeavor. So, yeah,
I
really,
agree. You're right.
yeah.
It's look, I didn't say anything that's a light bulb moment, frankly.
I
It's just
wouldn't.
sometimes
Yeah,
we need to be reminded of the price we have to pay.
that's right. That's right. That's the thing. You could have all the doctorates and all the PhDs, and you could have all those things. You'd be greatest athlete in the world, but if you don't have that bit between your teeth, and you don't have that people skill to capture rapport and hold these conversations and to engage, then that's not the right career for you. That's the bottom line. Um, Okay, so I got two more questions for you. You've been very
Okay.
generous with your time, Mark. And I mean, I can go. We could spend another 3 hours. Maybe we'll have to do another couple of parts of this thing, given all the experiences you've had. But I'd love to know, uh, as we round out this session, walking away with what is undoubtedly a very, very, very valuable experience from being in the Marines to being 20 years in the FBI and the cases that you've worked. Um, what would you say are the most important skills that you've learned from the FBI? What did you walk away with that are skills that you're gonna, because you had the people skills coming in. They didn't teach you work ethic, right? You just had that. But you did get, I mean, you did learn a lot. So I'm curious as to what do you think were some of the most important skills you took away from the FBI that maybe you even apply today?
Yeah. First thing that comes to mind is just discernment and having the ability to decide what's important and what's not. What battle is worth fighting, what hill's worth dying on,
Mhm.
and what hill's not. If you die on every hill, you're going to have a bloody career, right?
Right.
And you're going to be, and then you're going to be looked at as a combative and not a team player if you're willing to die on every hill. Discernment comes to mind. I've got 5 potential informants that I need to go target, but I don't have time to target all 5 of them. So my discernment's going to tell me, and my life experiences are going to tell me which one perhaps I need to go target. I've only got so many hours in a day. I got multiple cases. In the FBI, we don't just work one case at a time, especially when you're in a 4-man office. It's easy to have 12 open cases at one time, but I
Mhm.
can't work 12 cases every single day. So what particular case is going to get the preponderance of my time? That's going to get my attention. Discernment I think, that is the right answer there. And I think maybe I learned that or started to grasp that when I was an aide for a 2-star general,
Mm.
because it's important to have the 30,000-foot view as well as it is to have the on ground view as well. So sure, I was a small unit team leader. I had a 4-man team in Okinawa. I had a 40-man team in Hawaii, but I saw a general that had a 20,000-man team in the Pacific, right? And so things change and they're all equally important, but that discernment allows you to make the right decision at the right time for that situation. And how do you get there? How do you create discernment? That's part of, I think, your question. And that's going to be from your life experiences, from everything that your readers or leaders. What books have you read?
Hmm.
What mentors have you surrounded yourself with? And what life experiences do you have? Those are going to shape your discernment probably more than anything else.
And the FBI, for instance, when I speak to ex CIA officers, they'll often talk about what the type of training that they've gone through and some of the specialized skills that they walked away with. I understand that, for instance, one of the actual skills that the FBI taught you, I believe, was active shooter event training. I think you, right? I think you became
Correct.
certified in active shooter event um,
Response. Yeah.
response. There you go. That's
Hmm.
all. Thank you.
Yeah. Hmm.
I mean, that's a very that's specialized knowledge. Um, what does the FBI these days? What kind of skills, specialized skills? So there's life skills like the ones that you've now you've described that you've walked away that you're going to apply to the rest of your life. What kind of specialized skills does the FBI actually sit you down and train you on? I mean, do they do continuing education? Do they do continued training? Do they bring you in for, I know, for instance, in special operations, you're constantly going to schools. You're constantly going to different types of schools to learn different things, whether it's jumping out of airplanes, sniper school, dive school, like there's so many different things. Given the FBI is in order to be successful, you need people skills, and you need to operate at a level that is sophisticated, given the types of crimes you investigate, as opposed to a cop on the street. You investigate very different crimes. There's a level of sophistication to it, which is again why you're getting MBAs, why you're getting PhDs that come into the. So you need this level of this sophistication. What type of training and specialized skills does the FBI afford their agents?
Yeah. You ask, is there training in the FBI? And the answer is yes. And I've seen it grow and grow and grow for the good over my 20 years. When I first came in, receiving training was kind of rare, and you a handful of people only got chosen to go to certain training because the budget was smaller or the training just didn't exist and there weren't that many school seats available, and et cetera. And by the time I retired 20 years later, everybody's getting the type of training they need. If you're willing to travel and do the training, then there's an opportunity for you. So, and I strongly agree with that. And I think that a large part of that is because of the influence that the military's had on the FBI, because
Mm.
there's such. I'm going to guess here, but I don't think I'm far from it. I'm going to say that in today's FBI, a minimum of a third of all agents are veterans. It may be higher than that. Yeah. And they've all had positions of authority and influenced the culture and realized that training is important. When you were asking me that question, something came to mind. Many years ago, when I was at the Citadel as a corporal or a sergeant at the time,
Hmm.
there was a handful of us active duty Marines that were at the Citadel,
Okay.
and the Gulf War was going on. And we realized we missed our war. We didn't get to go to Iraq. We missed the Gulf War. We didn't get to go to Kuwait. Colonel Wesley Fox, who was the last at the time, was the last active duty Marine to, in fact, he was the last active duty Medal of Honor recipient at that during his generation. He retired in the early 90s. He came and visited us at the Citadel, and he was a colonel. He was my commanding officer when I was at Officers Candidate School, and he came and visited the Marines at the Citadel and had an open forum and took questions and answers. And Wesley Fox was a legend in the Marine Corps, had been awarded the Medal of Honor and so many others awards. And one of the questions someone asked him during this open session was, "Hey, we missed our war. What can we do to get back in the fight to make ourselves ready? Because you learn something in war you don't learn in training.
Mm.
So now that I've missed that, how can I get myself ready for the next war since I missed my one opportunity right here?" And his answer was comical in part, but we all knew what he meant. And his answer was this: it was, go to as many snake eating schools as you can.
Ooh.
Okay. Snake eating is just slang for adventure schools. Adventures is just slang for schools that are going to challenge you. The reason you're eating a snake is because they're starving you. You kill the snake, you cook it, you eat it. It's a common metaphor for SEER school. You're familiar with SEER school.
Yep.
Right. So when they starve you out there, you learn to live off the land. You're willing to eat anything so that you can. That's what he meant by that is go to these schools that are going to challenge you no matter what. Go to as many as you can. If you learn one thing from active shooter school, put that in your tool belt and never forget it. If you, I mean, granted, they taught you 20 things, but if you just took one away in your tool belt for the rest of your career, then that was a win. If you went to, how to write the best affidavit to convince a judge to give you a search warrant school, and you took one thing away from that, then that's a win. Now granted, that might not be the sexy adventure school that we're looking for, but the point is go to as many schools as you can. The more they challenge you, the better. In the military, it's going to be the physical challenge, perhaps, that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
In law enforcement, it's going to be perhaps an academic challenge as much as well, because we have that side of our job that's jurisprudence that we have to excel in. But go to those schools and learn from them and put all of that stuff into your toolbox. So your question was about training. Yes, thankfully the FBI is on board with training, and I'm a big fan of it. I can't tell you any one particular skill that I learned from any of the schools that I said, wow, this is the best thing I've ever learned, and I'm going to carry that with me the rest of my career. There were many, many nuggets that I found along the way, and they were all very valuable.
Speaking of active shooter, I don't want to end the conversation without asking you about, because that's a skill that could save a lot of lives. That active shooter event response training and knowledge that you have. What are some of the things that anyone should keep in mind should they somehow find themselves in an active shooter event, whether it's at a school, whether it's at a mall, whether it's at a supermarket, whatever the case may be? What would you say are some of the most important things to be aware of?
Are they a gunfighter or are they a civilian? And
Civilian,
what's
civilian.
civilian? Yeah. So it sounds cliche, but I think the Houston Police Department, I think, came up with this run, hide, fight motto.
Run,
And
hide, fight.
yeah. And as a civilian, I think that's very appropriate. I used to train with a guy one time, and he told his kids, he said, if you hear gunfire in school, you find your fastest way out of that room and you run until you have no more air in your lungs. You just run. You just get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's run. The guy's not going to chase you. The bad guy's not going to chase you. Okay. And if you get far enough away from his bullets, they're not going to chase you either. So run. And if you can't run, then barricade, hide. If you're in that school, you're in that mall, you go into that room, you take all your furniture, you put it in front of that door. He's not going to sit there and push against that door and demand to get into that room. He's going to go on to the next easy target. So make yourself difficult to kill by running and hiding, but run fast and hide hard. And then lastly, you may not have a choice but to fight. And then you just have to decide what that means. Does that mean I pick up anything, a chair or anything I can, and I go at him? I go in by myself. I recruit a couple people to go with me.
Mm-hmm.
That's a decision you're going to have to make as an individual. But however you choose to fight, it's okay. Fight is the key. What's not okay is choosing not to fight and dying, laying on the ground, looking down. Right, and hiding and hoping that he'll pass over you, right? And I don't mean that to besmirk anybody that's ever been in that situation before, but in hindsight, that's not what saves lives. That run, hide, fight, it was put together from studying all of the active shooter situations up until that day, and that's what people have done to survive. They've run, they've hid, and then they fight when they have to. You want to leave the fighting at the end, because that's what you're least prepared to do with a guy that's got a gun. And that's what the gunfighters are trained to do. Let them do the fighting for it. So in the meantime, you run and hide.
Yeah, fantastic. No, that's great advice. Okay, I said two more questions. Somehow I got more questions, so just two more questions.
Please.
The first is, so what type of training do you? I know you train law enforcement agencies. What type of training I mean, given your tool belt and everything you've learned, what do you find yourself training most often on with law enforcement agencies?
Yeah, when I first retired, I was hot and heavy into the active shooter realm, and I enjoyed that. And that would have been my answer in the first part of my retirement. But um, frankly, it was a lot of travel, Lawrence, and it was all over the United States. I was foreign countries and foreign states, it seemed like, on a regular basis. So I just decided it was too much of a grind. My training today is what we call human intelligence. It's how to sit down with people and elicit information and build rapport and build relationships. Yeah, and I teach that as a contract employee for the FBI.
Ah, well, that's apropos for for your background and for what you've achieved. Yeah, I could absolutely see that. That skill that we've been talking about.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a heck of a lot of sense. Let me not be remiss then and ask again another question, but maybe I shouldn't have skipped over only because a lot of the people that are listening to this are civilians, but in an active shooter event, as far as responding, if you do carry, if you do have a gun, um, what does that look like?
Yeah. Good question. You got to be proficient. Just carrying the gun on your hip does not mean that you're good at it.
Hmm.
So let me give you a mental example. I used to go into churches and I still do. I just don't do it as much. But it was kind of like my give back to the community to give free lectures to nonprofits, churches specifically.
Okay.
And I tell the church as they're sitting in the pews in the congregation, and I'm standing up where the pastor normally is, I'm standing up on a podium somewhere and I'm talking to them. And I said, right now, in the back of the room, if a guy came in with a gun and started shooting, and let's say there's 100 people here in this church auditorium in this little room today, inevitably, most people are going to stand up and start running. It's going to look like a beehive, people going everywhere. Okay, I'm using my hands to show this analogy. People are going everywhere. But there's one guy of that 100 that has a pistol, and he's going to stand up and he's going to see the bad guy. And he's going to engage him, and he's going to engage him with 100 bees running in front of him.
Mm,
Is he proficient enough to know when to pull the trigger and when not to? Can he shoot straight and hit the bad guy and not miss and hit a friendly? And so on and so on. So, my answer to your question is carry the gun. I encourage you to. The best example is up in White Settlement, Fort Worth, Texas. There was a bad guy that came into a church and opened fire. There was a member of that congregation that was a range instructor at the local gun range. He stood up, drew his pistol, and shot that guy across the head tops of everybody else, hitting zero friendlies and killed that guy with two shots. Okay. That's as textbook and as perfect as you can get. But
mm,
guess what? He was a everyday line instructor at a gun range. He shot for a living.
right.
Okay. So the guy, the average Joe sitting in church with a gun on his hip or being at the mall with a gun on his hip, how
Hmm.
often does he shoot? And does he have that discernment to say that's too far away? I don't know my background. If I miss, I'm going to hit somebody else, and so on and so on. So maybe the answer is I run to the fight. I have to get closer. I have to make sure that when I pull this trigger, I know I'm going to hit him. But we don't necessarily like to run to the fight. That takes a special person that runs to the fight.
Hmm.
So sometimes we get blinded by the fact I've got a gun on my hip and that's going to solve all my problems. Actually, pulling that gun from your holster, your problems could just be beginning, frankly. You
Right.
have a responsibility to do the right thing.
And then maybe the third is if you are a gunfighter, but you've never, so maybe you're really good, uh, right, with your pistol. You got a lot of training, so you're a good shot. Let's say you're a good shot. Um, then what is it that, what is it that you do? Like, what do you need to look out for? What do you need to be aware of? What is it that you need to consider if you find yourself in church? And is there anything? Do you keep your eye open for anyone who looks weird or suspicious? Like what's your advice for gunslingers? For those that actually know how to gunfighters that know how to shoot.
Yeah, trust your gut. There's a book written by Malcolm Caldwell called Blink, and it talks about the decisions we make in the blink of an eye. That's really our subconscious and our gut telling us what the answer is. And then all of a sudden we consciously re-examine it, and then we cast that off and we go with the conscious decision.
Mhm.
Sometimes we need to go with the subconscious decision. We need to go with the blink, the moment that, that our gut tells us what the right thing to do is. So when you see that guy with the trench coat that looks like he's up to no good, that's your subconscious telling you, hey, there's something there. Trust your gut is the first thing I would tell you. It doesn't hurt not to trust your gut. If you keep your eye on that person and it turns out that it's a false alarm, then it's a false alarm. But how bad would it be if he was the guy and you, okay, I'm just overreacting. And then you let him walk away and then he goes and shoots somebody later and you could have perhaps stopped it.
Mm.
So trust your gut on whether or not you want to engage somebody or whether you just want to be suspicious of somebody. But then once the shooting starts, look, the truth of the matter is law enforcement is not going to arrive on scene in the immediacy of a active shooter situation. Now, if it's at the mall, there's probably going to be some police officers there in some form or fashion, but
Mhm.
they still have to run to the X and they have to get there. And if it's at church, there's nobody there. There's no law enforcement that's going to be there. So you now are the guy that can stop the killing.
Mm.
So you have to have that mindset of knowing, am I the guy or do I have help? And if you decide I'm the guy in the first 60 seconds that's going to be able to stop the killing, then you just have to have that warrior's mindset. And just as if you have spent all that time on the range shooting paper targets, how much time have you rehearsed in your mind that if this was to really happen, this is what I'm going to do? I'm going to run towards the gunfire. That's not something that people think about often. Am I going to run towards the gunfire? Because what's your first reaction? It's to freeze, look around, etc. Take the long shot, maybe run away, but at least take the long shot. But the fact of the matter is, other than these rare examples that I just mentioned to you, when civilians have gotten involved and stopped an active shooter situation, they have run to the gunfire. They've run to the gunfight.
Mm. So the run in the equation takes on a whole different meaning in those instances. You're not running away. You got to run too.
Yeah. Yeah.
There it is. My final question, Mark. So, as an F as an FBI agent, I mean, certainly the Marines, but as an FBI agent, um, what is it after all these years that you have learned about the human condition and the nature of man? So a bit of a philosophical question,
Yeah.
but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the human condition, the nature of man. What is
Yeah.
your assessment?
Yeah. I'm not fooled. As a Christian, I realize that we're all fallen, and I don't have um, any hesitation to say that even the best of us is fallen. We all have feet of clay. That's not to give it a blow off and just say, look, nobody's perfect, because that's too simple, right? We all know that nobody's perfect. And what I mean by that we're all fallen is that, you know, the guy that mows his grass today, every day, and you wave at him, and that's your next door neighbor that is out on his riding lawnmower and mows his grass. And then you find out tomorrow that he shot and killed his family in a drunken rage. That's the fallen of man, right? That we're all capable of doing that. And if we don't think that we aren't in some form or fashion, then we're fooling ourselves. So that's where we're at as people, is that we all have that proclivity to be fallen and so forth. But if we surround ourselves with a strong moral compass, in my case, in your case, it's the Christian faith, and we surround ourselves with good people, then we're more likely to be successful and overcome that fallen condition as a whole. We're still going to fall. We're still going to sin. We're still going to be fallen. But the magnitude and the scope of that fall will now, I believe, will be less and less because we put ourselves in situations where we're going to win. We're reading the right books. We're talking to the right people. We're living the right type of life so that we're not putting ourselves in those situations where we can fall and fall hard and so forth. But never be mistaken that we think that we can't do that we can't commit a sin that can hurt people, because we can. And that's the state of man. Now, that sounds awful dour and depressing, because there's guys that put on the uniform every day to fight just the opposite of that type of reaction and encounter out in society and so forth. And I was one of those guys. And all my peers are those type of people as well. And I'm so thankful we have them. But we all have to start from the beginning of knowing who we are and what the human condition is.
Man, praise God.
Indeed.
So, Mark, where can our audience learn more? Where can they find, your book, obviously on Amazon, but, where can our audience look for more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah. I don't have a lot out there, Lawrence. I have a website. It's i68books.com.
Okay.
I as in Isaiah, 6 as in chapter 6, verse 8, which is a common scripture that's used in law enforcement and the military. And so Isaiah 6:8 is abbreviated. i68books.com is my website that tells about the case and about the book. You're going to say something?
Yeah. For the audience that doesn't know, tell them what the verse, the chapter verse actually
Yeah. So Isaiah, the prophet, is inside the temple, and he hears God call out, "Who will go for me?" And Isaiah says very clearly, "Here I am, send me." And so law enforcement, military have adopted that verse, "Send me, here I am." In fact, I just read a book, and I can't remember the young lady's name, but she was a Navy intelligence officer that was enlisted, that was killed in Syria. And that was her motto as well, "Send me." And that's the name of the book, is "Send Me." She was married to a Green Beret, and she was a intelligence officer on the Navy side. Fascinating story. Brave young lady. So "Send Me" is common in the first responder community. That's what it means. Yeah.
Excellent. So you got the site. Is it i68.org?
Books.com.
i68books.com. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I encourage everyone to get the book. I'm telling you now, it literally, it's like it's like a great episode of Law and Order. It's the best way for me to describe it. Like, it's like if you wanted to see
That's a good analogy.
Right? It's like a great episode of Law and Order.
But Lawrence, it's the old Law and Order with Jerry Orbach.
It has to be.
Yeah. It has to be the old one.
It has to be the old one. And you got all the special guest stars showing up. It's a great story.
Yes.
It's a wild book. So I highly recommend it to anyone who's into true crime or just a really interesting story, because you get into fantastic detail. And yeah, the story is told really well. So
thank you.
Excellent. Mark, thank you for your service. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. God bless you. Right? Just a fantastic conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoy listening to your podcast. You have great guests, and I hope I can live up to that. So thank you for the invite.
My pleasure. My pleasure. All right. Mark Sewell, Alpha Human Podcast. We're out.